What's up everyone, and welcome back to my Echoes of Time channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. There are 14 surprising facts about Helen Keller that are not taught in schools. If you've received even the most basic American education, you've probably heard of Helen Keller. She was an amazing woman who fought her way to renown after becoming blind and deaf at the age of 19 months. Keller could stand up for people who didn't have a voice, and she wasn't alone anymore thanks to her famous teacher, Anne Sullivan. She worked for women's rights and education till she died quietly in 1968. For decades, many people have praised her for her determination and creativity, and they have been amazed by what she has done. Keller could talk to the world around her with flawless accuracy, even if she couldn't see or hear. Just think about how smart that is. But Keller's opinions on politics and society got more severe, which was the opposite of her intelligence. Helen Keller was never afraid to try new ways of thinking, and in her quest to conquer life, she came across some strange and sometimes strange notions. You know about Helen Keller's friendship with Sullivan and how she bravely traveled the world even though she couldn't see or hear, but the icon is more than just the Hallmark Channel shows. Her grandfathers and father were important Confederate leaders. Helen Keller was born in Tuscumbia, Alabama, but she left the South when she was 8 and never really came back. But her grandmother and dad were quite close to the antebellum South. Before the war, her paternal grandfather came down from Massachusetts to fight for the Confederacy. He was Robert E. Lee's second cousin. Her maternal grandfather was a Confederate general, and her father was a Confederate captain. Those roots are really Southern. Keller's father was a newspaper editor and, strangely, a big advocate of education, even though his ideas were not always good. Alexander Graham Bell sent her parents to Anne Sullivan School. Not many people know that Alexander Graham Bell worked hard and for a long time to help deaf people hear and speak. Maybe this urge came from the fact that his own mother was deaf. People today think that Bell's efforts to make it illegal to use sign language in schools for the deaf were a little controversial. In any case, he agreed to meet with Arthur and Kate Keller in 1886, when he was at the height of his profession, to talk about the problems their daughter was having. Helen said that when they first met, when he made his pocket watch chime so she could feel the vibration, she loved him right away. Bell told the Kellers to go to the Perkins Institution in Boston. Bell also kept working with Keller on her schooling even after sending her to see another doctor. They stayed friends for the remainder of their lives. Keller was the first person to bring the Akita dog to America. In 1937, Helen Keller and her friend Polly Thompson went to Japan to give talks. The Japanese often called Keller Saint Keller and Saint of Three Burdens, among other names of honor. Keller went to the Akita province of Japan on this trip in the aim of finding the famous Akita Hachiko. Hachiko got famous for how loyal he was. Every day at 3 p.m., the dog would follow his owner to the train station to greet him. The owner of Hachiko died in the city after having a stroke one day. Hachiko waited for his master to come home late at night and greeted the 3 p.m. train. Every day at 3 o'clock, Hachiko went back to the train station, even though it was given to family friends who lived far away. Keller grew to love the breed after hearing the story. When she said she wanted to meet one, Keller made plans for her to meet Kamikaze, a puppy that he had imported to the U.S. Keller worked on the Vaudeville circuit to get money. When Helen Keller initially started to make a name for herself as a young woman, Vaudeville promoters were intrigued in her. And Sullivan always told Keller not to interact with these people, telling her to retain some dignity. Keller, on the other hand, did not think that the vaudeville offers would hurt her reputation. She thought it was interesting. Helen Keller convinced Anne Sullivan to let her appear in vaudeville in 1919 after her last 2 books didn't sell well. People who saw Keller on her travels appreciated her a lot, especially when she had time to answer their questions. People all around the country were amazed by Keller's incredible wit. Helen Keller and a famous writer were great friends. As Helen Keller got more famous, she became a highly popular social companion. Reports say that she knew Charlie Chaplin, Eleanor Roosevelt, Martha Graham, and Oliver Wendell Holmes in a casual way. She also got invitations to meet with the Queen of England and 12 U.S. presidents in a row, from Grover Cleveland to John F. Kennedy. Helen Keller and Mark Twain, whom she met at a lunch in 1895, had the strongest bond of all. Twain loved Keller so much that he wrote to a friend asking him to help pay for Keller's education. Twain wrote in the letter, "It won't do for America to let this wonderful child stop going to school because she is poor. If she can keep on with them, she will be famous for a long time." Keller says that Twain didn't treat me like a freak, but like a disabled woman trying to get around very hard problems. Twain famously told reporters that Napoleon Bonaparte and Helen Keller were the two most interesting people of the 1800s. A radical socialist firebrand, Helen Keller was not new to politics. She was actually a strong supporter of Vladimir Lenin's Marxist ideals and the fight for workers' rights. Keller is the best person to talk about how much she admired Lenin since she was a great writer who wrote a lot. These excerpts are from Keller's short essay The Spirit of Lenin, which was first published in 1929. Even while I think that all honest opinions should be treated fairly, I speak out against those who promote the power of gold. I can't help but feel terrible for people who are oppressed and feel like they have to use violence to get what they deserve. That's one of the reasons I'm so interested in the huge experiment going on in Russia right now. When men leave the ground, the furrows they have plowed stay behind. I see the hole that Lenin left behind filled with the indestructible germ of a new life for humanity. Deep below the stormy seas and lightning, there are strong crops that will be harvested for years to come. So, it's safe to say that she was a staunch supporter of the Russian Revolution in the early 1900s. Helen Keller had to stay celibate for whatever reason. Helen Keller never tied the knot. This was partly because, when she was at her best, society thought that individuals with impairments shouldn't be in close relationships. As a child, Keller surreptitiously read romance novels, but even her famous teacher Anne Sullivan would scold her for giving in to her basic human needs. The prospect of someone calling on her was more worse because her family didn't want her to be alone with guys. In 1916, when Anne Sullivan got very sick, Keller almost got married. Keller had a private secretary named Peter Fagan, with whom she had a short but covert romance. Shortly after that, the two broke up, and Keller never had the chance to engage in a serious adult relationship again. Helen Keller and Anne Sullivan's husband were also quite close. John Macy was born in 1877 and was a very smart student at Harvard. He was in charge of the school's literary scene. Helen Keller, who went at Radcliffe, Harvard's women's division, made friends with Macy when she was there. Macy was so taken with Keller that he vowed to help her write. Macy and Anne Sullivan and Helen Keller were so close that she started spending a lot of time at their house. At the time, it was said that Sullivan and Keller saw themselves as one person. So when Macy fell in love with Keller, he also fell in love with Sullivan. From 1900 to 1914, the three were always together. In 1905, Macy even got Sullivan to marry him. Unfortunately, the partnership couldn't last. Keller was so essential to Macy that she had to be with them all the time, even on their honeymoon. Sullivan was also a touch moody for very good reasons, which made things much more stressful. By 1914, Macy had moved out of the house for good. The FBI kept an eye on Helen Keller because of her political work. Helen Keller said she was a Leninist. It goes without saying that she was well known for supporting issues that were controversial at the time but are now very evident, like ending child labor and giving women the right to vote. In 1908, she officially joined the American Socialist Party because she supported these extreme, progressive political aims. Keller thought that socialism was a method to fight back against the oppression of the industrial age. In 1912, she wrote, "And what a world it is! How different from my religious world! I have to face the facts head-on. The world is full of pain, decay, blindness, and sin. It is fighting against the elements, the unknown, and itself." Keller's strong political ideas were mostly based on her love for the poor and oppressed. The FBI kept a record of Keller's comings and goings on a regular basis because of her views to make sure she didn't become a state enemy. She could talk to people in a dozen various ways. Even though she was blind and deaf, Keller was able to converse better than most people today 100 years ago. In addition to learning how to sign, Keller learned how to use a conventional and raised key typewriter, read Braille and raised type, and even outtype and Sullivan. She also learned to read lips, which is astounding because she could only use her sense of touch. She even learned to talk, although she was never quite happy with how well she spoke. Keller also enjoyed music. She could hear the music by putting her very sensitive fingertips on an instrument and feeling variations in vibration. She was the first deaf-blind person to graduate from college. Helen Keller's life was full of amazing things that should make most people feel very small. She had a million ways to talk to people, and literary geniuses, presidents, and queens all loved her. She wasn't afraid to utilize her fame to make a lot of money in vaudeville. She also graduated from Harvard, which made her the first deaf-blind person to do so from an American college. Keller was actually a student at Radcliffe College, which was Harvard's women's college at the time. She did it with honors, too, cum laude. It would take 50 years for another deaf-blind individual to do the same thing. She was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. In 1953, Helen Keller was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Individuals from all across the world helped Keller, which showed how much she cared about helping individuals with disabilities. Even if she didn't receive the prize, her work around the world was definitely recognized. Helen Keller won an Oscar. Helen Keller won an Academy Award for her role in the documentary Helen Keller in Her Story, which was about her life. She was 75 years old at the time. Nancy Hamilton wrote and directed the 1955 movie, which was an homage to Keller's great labor for others. 7 years later, Patty Duke would receive an Oscar for her role as Helen Keller in The Miracle Worker. The Alabama State Quarter shows off her picture. Helen Keller is on the Alabama State Quarter for the 50 State Quarters program. It came out in 2003, making it the first U.S. circulating coin to feature Braille. There is a banner below her image that says Spirit of Courage. This shows how strong she was in the face of many difficult situations during her life.